Okay, so I think we can start. Welcome everyone to our first seminar in our series on Digital and Public Humanities, organized by the Center for Digital and Public Humanities at Foscari University. And we had the optimistic idea to go back to presence, so at least to have a hybrid format, to have the presenter here and those enthusiasts who are able to attend the seminar in presence in this wonderful aula, the Sala Trentin in Cadolfin. Unfortunately, as most of you already realized, Ioannis is not able to be in presence, so I feel very much alone on this wide table because of the snowstorm in Athens. So all flights have been cancelled, and so we are happy that you are all right and your family is all right, and very sad that you can't be here in presence today. But I mean, we are used to online presentations. That won't be a problem. It's just a pity we won't be able to have a spritz afterwards here in Venice. And I hope the weather will be fine so that you can make it and come back to Venice as soon as possible. So this is our seminar series. We have 5 more presentations upcoming in the next few weeks and months. The program is all online. Thank you first of all to Stefano Dall'Aglio, who organized again this wonderful series of talks in Digital and Public Humanities. This is being recorded as always, so be aware of this, and will be published on our YouTube channel in due course. So if you want to go back to the material and to the wonderful things Giovanni is presenting in a minute, you can go back to YouTube and listen to the presentation and the following discussion at any time. I don't think there are further technical announcements, so I'm very glad I'm not completely alone. So here is audience, Giovanni. I'm very sorry you can't see the audience, but I mean, we definitely make sure that we have social distancing here in the sala, so because it's really huge, and we have lots of participants online, so 50 participants online. If there are no other announcements to be made of the technical kind, I would like to introduce you now to our guest speaker today, Gianni Pavlopoulos from Athens, Thessaloniki, Stockholm. So Giovanni or John or Giannis Pavlopoulos has a research focus on machine learning for natural language processing with applications for the humanities. That's why he is here, our visiting scholar at the Venice Centre for Digital and Public Humanities. So especially he's working applying sentiment analysis, computational attribution, abusive language detection, and grammatical error detection or correction. This is where he published numerous articles and also monographies before coming to Venice to join our center as a visiting scholar to work on epigraphic, papyrological, and philological materials. John has been a Google-funded postdoctoral researcher at Athens University of Economics and Business, where he was also awarded his PhD in computer science in 2015, and he is a senior lecturer at Stockholm University. He's also affiliated researcher at the Ritsumeikan University at Japan, and in fact, among other things, he will talk today about Japanese landscapes prints, namely on natural language processing as a means to study the relationship between topography and its visual renderings. So this is really exciting. And the title of your talk, Giovanni, is Natural Language Processing for the Digital Humanities, focusing on art history and the Homeric question. So very welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Franz, I'm glad to be here, at least virtually, and very sad not to be in the aula presenting from there, but I had really a terrible snowstorm to bypass. It was impossible. Other than that, I've been working with natural language processing many years, but it's only the recent years that I'm focused on ancient languages and on applications of digital humanities, and I'm excited that this path brought me to Foscari and Venice, and thank you for having me. So I should directly go into the title. I have around approximately 40 or 45 slides, but please feel free to interrupt me and we can make a live discussion at any point you feel like. The title is Natural Language Processing for the Digital Humanities, and this is a study focused on art history and the Homeric question. Preliminary results from both were very recently presented at the first Digital Humanities workshop. So I should start directly with the updated slides I presented at that workshop, and I should say that I try to adapt the presentation so that make a single story. It may look like it's the slides presented at the workshop, but they do make a single concept, that of distant, and I will elaborate more in a while. So the first study is automated recognition of geographical named entities in titles of ukiyo-e prints, and it is collaborative work with Eva and Marita. In fact, for the slides of this presentation, I owe special thanks to Eva, the art historian of the team, and I also, I must acknowledge Konstantin Aliagu, the most recent member of this team. And first, let me directly start explaining the rationale for this project. And what is the medium? What do Japanese early modern woodblock prints mean? So, ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world, produced between the 17th and mid-19th century. They are one of the most widely recognizable visual images today, and among diverse topics depicted in these images, landscape prints remain the most popular, as also evidenced by the iconic The Great Wave that you can see here, designed by Katsushika Hokusai in the 1830s, and its global career, of course. However, the understanding of prints is still shaped by what we would call Western modern epistemologies that may not be well fitted for the analysis of pre-modern, non-Western artifacts. So, for example, the genre of landscape is a Western modern art category that is linked to the function of images as representations of certain places and topography. But this category is applied to pre-modern objects, such as this Hokusai's print created in the 1830s only after Japan started its modernization process in 1868. Therefore, to understand social function of pre-modern prints, there is a need to approach them from a different perspective. From a different perspective that takes us as an analytical point of departure the objects themselves, so their content, formal characteristics, their historical context. The question is, however, how to do it, considering that corpora are extremely rich and diversified. So traditional analytical methods that are based on close reading or interpretation of individual images cannot be effective for this task. So to develop a new classification of Japanese prints, this project approached the task by employing named entity recognition, which is an NLP technique, a natural language processing technique used to detect named entities in texts. In principle, named entity recognition can be used to extract named locations from any text, including ones mentioned in the titles of Japanese prints. Any extracted locations then may allow for a digital geospatial exploration of the studied prints, which can shed light regarding the geographical distribution of the sites depicted within the prints, as well as regarding the frequency analysis of the depiction of certain sites in relation to, again, for example, the production context, time, location, designer. So the combination of distant viewing or macroanalysis of visual materials and close reading of the artifacts has a potential to develop a more nuanced understanding of prints. With that said, This paper investigates the application of natural language processing as a means to study the relationship between topography and its visual renderings in early modern Japanese landscape prints. In the following slides, first we introduce the corpus. You can see the corpus that was used along with the art historian who annotated the titles, the inscriptions inside these prints, and included place names. And then you can see a description of the methodology. How did we approach this distant viewing? So some more information regarding the problem. The 19th century Japan saw the rise in popularity of prints depicting countryside. But despite their seemingly straightforward subject, and I mean landscape, the social function of these images is little understood as it is rooted in a different episteme. These images were in fact defined as ukiyo-e, pictures of famous places. The topography was not necessarily relevant, as the concept of meso derives from poetic rhetorical figures. I will go into more details in a while about this. And these poetic rhetorical figures that are seasonal images with particular places. As for example, we can focus on this print by Otagawa Hiroshige, if I pronounce correctly the name, from the woodblock print series, The 8 Views of Omi. So the inscription in the square cartridge in the upper left corner features the following poem. The long bridge at Seta, over which crosses the setting sun, passing far beyond the mountains, dripping with autumn dew. The image presents a view of the famous Seta Bridge in the southeast part of Lake Biwa, with Mount Mikami in the background. Although Mount Mikami is not very high, and approximately at 432 meters, its form has been modified to liken it to Mount Fuji, which is 3,776 meters high. But the image curates reality on one more level, at least one more level. Despite being produced at the peak of the famine, it shows an idyllic view of the countryside. So interpretation of these images requires understanding how they refer, depict, and distort topography. What places are depicted, what places are not featured in the images, how are these places distributed across Japan, and also in relation to socio-cultural, political, and economic contexts. It could be how their distribution changes over time, and depending on the designer, publisher, regarding the format, and more. Considering the scope of the data and the nature of the inquiry, it is why we think computational methods can offer potential assistance in art historical studies. And to view by distance, by contrast to close reading, we need data. Fortunately, the access to the data for this work was facilitated by the database hosted by the Art Research Centre at Ritsumeikan University. This is one of the leading digital humanities hubs in Japan, and they are also a collaborative partner of this project, and we are thankful for this. The centre's digital databases of Japanese printed culture hosts approximately 700,000 prints kept at 28 institutions in Japan and abroad. And this study investigated approximately 20,000 digitized prints featuring natural environments, and they were issued around 1800 and 1850s. So from these 20,000 digitized prints, which arose from our search based on the keyword meso, famous place, and meso-e, which means image of a famous place, we randomly selected 200 samples, which we annotated and used them to train and test machine learning algorithms regarding extracting place name entities, as mentioned already. So an art historian, Iva, an expert in Japanese early modern history, annotated two sets of images, 100, each batch from with 100 instances, which were randomly sampled. And the annotation process was guided by two major principles. First, all places that were possible to be pinned on a map. So we wanted to use this as to guide this annotation. For example, names of cities, temples, bridges, all these were annotated as geopolitical entities because there is a standard in name entity recognition about types of name entities that can be annotated. And second, places that were less easily pinned on a map. So this could mean roads or mountain ranges. These were annotated as LOC, meaning location, and this is another typical name used. So what we did is we created a training set using 100 annotated instances, and we used as an evaluation set the remaining 100 instances. So some statistics are shown, but I would like to do a small pause here from this narration and say that 200 instances annotated are way too few to train machine learning algorithms. This could even be impossible a few years back when machine learning was still not that mature. Today, there are different techniques that can be used to assist this, as they call it, few-shot learning, or at least not few-shot learning, but training with less data. For example, transfer learning and different techniques. So as I'm going to say exactly in this slide, we used an open source NLP library that was already pre-trained on Japanese name entity recognition, among other tasks. This means that if you gave it a Japanese text, you would expect results high. So F1 is the standard score, the classification score one could give, which was 72%, and this is divided to precision and recall. By precision is a measure of how accurate is the model, the machine learning model, when it gives a prediction, and the recall is how accurate is the model with regards to what it should have been predicted. So, for example, a model that says always something as name entity would have a very small precision because everything would have been annotated as a name entity. But yeah, it's an evaluation score. As such, we can keep it. And even if we don't give an intuitive meaning of what recall is, we can see that this model that achieves 72% out of the box when applied on our data, on these inscriptions or anyway text complementing these e-prints, achieves not more than 15%, which means that we cannot use it. It's not usable. If we wanted to do it, this research, if we wanted to employ NLP and name entity recognition, we can't do it. So what we did, I could give some more details, but I'll come back after if I have to. So what we did is we did an error analysis, and we tried to see what happens, why the model fails. And what we saw is that name entities are detected correctly. So the words that we were looking for are indeed correctly extracted, but the assigned label is mistaken. So it's not like the geopolitical entity was correctly assigned. It might have been organization or something different. This motivated us to calibrate the existing pre-trained model that we used, the spacing model, by using fine-tuning, as they call it, on our dataset to investigate the benefits. So by using the small training set that we created to fine-tune this pre-trained NER model, name entity recognition model, we register improvements. As you can see, F1 was improved for both tags. And here I can give more details. So again, when we say precision, we mean the fraction of correctly predicted entities out of the ones predicted. And when we say recall, we mean the correctly predicted entities out of the ones that should have been predicted. And F1 is simply the mean, the average of the two, the harmonic mean. And the results were impressive, considering the few annotated instances that we had to annotate. So for geopolitical entities, both precision and recall improved, while for other locations, precision fell, but recall improved far more, hence leading to 26% units increase in F1. And given that the reported performance is 72, we know that there is room for improvement. So this makes it a small circle of that study that we extended afterwards. But at this point, results were presented of the first step of an analytical process aimed at the investigation of the relationship between topography and its visual renderings in early modern Japanese ukiyo-e landscape prints. Due to the complexity of the question and research material at hand, name entity recognition could be used. We saw that it can be used to detect place names in the inscriptions of prints. And we proposed an approach to generate labeled data to facilitate distance viewing. And this can assist art historical studies, as already argued, of this complex research material. So out-of-the-box models won't work, as it was shown, but experimental analysis indicates that it can be improved by 30% by using part of a new dataset that is also introduced and to be released for public use. Therefore, we argue that distant viewing or macroanalysis of visual datasets can be facilitated. And this is needed to assist our historical studies of this rich and diverse research material. So by adding more data, an automated annotator of satisfying performance can be established, and this will then be applied to assist realization of the mentioned overarching goals of this study. So the dataset and models, I should say now that they are under review by an NLP conference, they will be made publicly available, and the extended work of this presentation that showed that we can use NLP to distant view did the next step and did create a map to study what we could gain from this distant instead of this close view. And this concludes the first part of this presentation that talks about distant. But instead of viewing, now we are going to change the second term and we are going to distant read. So the latter study is titled Computational Authorship Analysis of Homeric Languages, And this is a collaborative study with Maria Fasoi and Maria Kostadinidou. And to be more precise, these are the slides of the work presented at the same workshop. And these are based on the MSc dissertation of Maria Fasoi at the Athens University of Economics and Business, who was supervised by Maria Kostadinidou and myself. Going into details, computational authorship analysis concerns the computational study of the authorship nature. So, for example, authorship attribution and verification can be seen as subtasks or related at least tasks. We use computational means in this work to analyze Homeric texts, or rather in texts that according to the prevailing view are attributed to Homer. First, the Homeric epics, Iliad and Odyssey, and also we use 4 out of the 23 in total so-called Homeric hymns. The computational approach that we followed is based on language modeling, and it will be described next. And our analysis consists of identifying the linguistic affinity or similarity between Homeric fragments, hymns, and books. We validated the use of language modeling by setting up an experiment. We use the language models to classify between the 2 points, much like a task of Homeric language understanding. And we compared these results against human experts. So models are expected to be able to distinguish which fragment comes from which poem. But before I go into more detail for this experiment, I should give a few more words about the motivation. And it stems from the Homeric question, which is possibly the most prominent issue ever raised in classical studies. At the center of the debate lies the composition process of Homer's 2 epic poems, Iliad and Odyssey, and it focuses mainly on whether they were originally composed by a single poet and later enriched and improved by performing bards, or if they reached their current form by collecting and stitching together several smaller independent parts. So this is the question. Perhaps pre-existing oral formulae compositions used by bards to improvise and remember longer works. But with that said, it is now commonly accepted that both Iliad and Odyssey are products of a collective effort. And this effort involves numerous authors, each contributing unknown portions of texts, probably scattered throughout the thousands of verses and gradually smoothed into the rest of the poems. It cannot be determined exactly whether it was a single individual or distinct group of poets contributed larger chunks of such additional verses or even whole books. Therefore, the pursuit of this study is to investigate sizable portions of text of the type that urged some scholars such as Fowler to doubt the authenticity of whole books. We note here that the division of both Iliad and Odyssey in books, rhapsodies as they would be, as they are called in Greek, is substantially later than the original composition. So, elaborating a bit more, it's not about attribution, does it belong to Homer, or verification, are these 2 texts belong to the same author, but it's more like analyzing, taking as granted that these texts have been created by multiple authors and trying to analyze authorship. So other poetry of antiquity has been attributed to Homer from time to time, and as the name suggests, Homeric hymns were among them due to their form and language. Although it is now known that this is not the case, and due to lack of much contemporary poetry, these were employed as a useful parallel for linguistic comparison with the two poems. In later work, we experimented with more works like Hesiod's, but still, the Homeric hymns were a useful parallel corpus. The research questions are the following two. So, do any of the books in either Iliad or Odyssey demonstrate higher or lower than average degree of linguistic integration to the entire poem? Does any of them present sufficient linguistic divergence to raise authorship doubts? And how do they compare to similar literature of their time? Two, can language models be as successful as humans in classifying experts from Iliad and Odyssey? So, what is computational authorship analysis? We use this term to refer to the study of any association between a corpus and a group of authors. When only a single author is involved, and when the association concerns attribution, then this task is redefined to authorship attribution or verification. In verification, the aim is to determine whether two texts should be attributed to the same author or not. While in attribution, the problem is to identify the author of an anonymous text or a text whose authorship is in doubt. So, looking back at historical data, we see that first attempts to authorship attribution in the 18th century, in the works of the English poet and theatrical author William Shakespeare, were followed in the 19th century, were followed by a question of one of the most important issues in the field of classical studies, the question of the dating of Platonic dialogues. So, in the 20th century then, a famous example of authorship attribution is the Federalistic Papers. The authorship attribution, however, also finds application in some other fields, such as the process of plagiarism detection, the forensic investigation in case of identification of the author of an anonymous text, and even in the case of email phishing. Today, in the 21st century, interest in this field remains undiminished, and it is also growing in computer science. At least the four more recent years. Indicatively, we report 3 studies of authorship attribution and verification with computational methods. The first, it's the work Commentari di Bello Gallico by Julius Caesar, and the second is the study of authorship attribution in the tragedy Rissos by Euripides. Finally, the last concerns the study of attribution of a newly discovered Latin text from antiquity. The Compendiosa Expositio to the well-known North African author Apuleius. And now, starting to go into details about the more data science of natural language processing involved and needed to do this kind of work, to do this distant reading. The data of this research, as mentioned, are the Homeric poems, Iliad, Odyssey, and 4 out of the 33 Homeric hymns. These are to Apollo, to Hermes, προς Απόλλωνα, Αφροδίτη, Δήμητρα και Ερμή. We chose these hymns because of their sufficient length, ranged from 293 to 580 verses, and the data were extracted from TLG and coded in TEI. Preprocessing involved removing the TEI encoding, removing punctuation, all the editorial symbols, however keeping some, for example, the accents and the diacritics from the text, essentially for 2 reasons. First, accents and diacritics are considered a part of the spelling of a word, so a different accent can change a word semantically. However, this happens in a very small percentage, and many times we understand which word we read, and even in case of spelling error or without the presence of accents. The second reason is that we decided to keep these distinctive points because accents and diacritics are an integral part of the metric rules, and because they are meticulous poems, they may play a role in the sequence of characters. Perhaps. Then we converted all the text to a lowercase form. This could have been different. Keeping capitalization could give different results, but this was our hypothesis. We kept this, have not experimented with different forms, and then formed a vocabulary of 120 characters for Iliad and 119 for Odyssey. This can be seen on the right. So before I go to the next slide, I should say, and I try to indirectly point that preprocessing of Homeric language is not standard. It's not like preprocessing modern languages. Different preprocessing could have led to different results, and this should definitely be studied in future work. And now going into, I hope, the least math, or as could be presented in layman terms, I should start with intuition. So we model Homeric language using character-level statistical language models. And these are based on a very simple assumption. This is the Markov assumption. In other words, we model the probability of the next character by being given only the n minus 1 preceding characters. In other words, if I want to predict the weather tomorrow, you can only tell me what was the weather 3 days ago. Excluding the paradigm of Athens and the snowstorm, this works. So if you know what was the weather in 3 days, you can predict with a good probability what will be the weather tomorrow. And this is the same, but instead of weather, we have characters. We try to predict the next character, and we say that if you give me the 3 or 4 previous characters, I will quite accurately predict the next one. So the counts of all sequences of n characters called n-grams are calculated over a corpus empirically, and the probability distribution of all the possible characters is modeled for each gram, as we call it, this sequence. In this work, we use trigrams, meaning 3 characters in a row, which show to achieve best results in preliminary experiments. In order to make the individual analysis of a text in n-grams more comprehensible, we present the character trigrams of the following phrase from the preface of the first book of Iliad. And you can see the trigrams here being formed as the window slides, character by character, and then the counts lead to probabilities, and the probabilities are used to model and have the language model and predict the next character. So we use perplexity, called PPL, also as an indicator of how well a language model predicts an expert. In NLP, this measure is used to evaluate language models, but in our study, we employ it as a means to evaluate the origin of a textual excerpt, with greater unrestricted values indicating weak relation between the text in question and the model, and lower values indicating a strong relation. So to give another example here, we said we build a language model on text. So we compute the statistics, we use them to compute probabilities, and then we take another excerpt, a test text, and we try to see how well would the model have predicted these characters of that test fragment. The higher the probability of this text in question, the more likely it is that it has been predicted by a similar corpus that we use to train our model. So to complement PPL with a notion of statistical significance, and this means how likely it is that a repetition of the results would produce the same conclusions, we computed and added 95% confidence intervals. So instead of reporting a single perplexity value of a single excerpt in question, we sampled randomly a number of excerpts, and then we report the average score of these fragments, along with a score that was ranked at the lower 2.5% and at the higher 97.5%, hence the 95% confidence interval. So first we analyzed the poems by training on and evaluating the books of each Homeric poem internally. Then we used language models trained on the books of the poem to analyze external excerpts taken from the Homeric image. To verify that language modeling can serve the purpose that we hypothesized, we experimented with an artificial Homeric language understanding task. So to do so, first we assessed the ability of human experts to classify fragments taken either from Iliad or Odyssey. The predictions of the human experts were then compared with those of a text classification system that used the predictions of the two models, one trained on Iliad and one on the Odyssey. So given a test fragment, the system computed two scores, one per poem, and then simply predicted the poem whose model achieved the best score. Evaluation was measured with accuracy, meaning the fraction of correctly classified excerpts. And starting from the latter, first we assessed the ability of human experts to classify Homeric texts. As said, we created a questionnaire. This was addressed to students and graduates of Greek philology departments, and the purpose of which was to investigate the ability of the human experts to locate without any search for sources, without searching in books or without online searches. It assessed how well, if they could correctly attribute the experts to Homer. And then, on one hand, we had two language models, one trained on with text from Iliad and one with text from Odyssey, while on the other hand, we had the human experts. The aim of both was to classify Iliad and Odyssey experts as belonging to Iliad or Odyssey. And after all this material, here comes the results, which I think is the most interesting part. So in blue, you can see the accuracy of all human experts, along with the performance of the system in red. So the system failed to classify correctly just two excerpts. By contrast, most of the human experts scored lower on accuracy, while some had significant difference. By measuring precision and recall per poem, precision for Iliad here, for example, is the fraction of test fragments that were correctly assigned to Iliad out of the fragments that the system said they belong to Iliad. And recall is the fraction of fragments that were correctly assigned to Iliad out of the ones that really belonged to Iliad. And again, F1 is the harmonic mean of the two. These scores are computed both for Iliad and Odyssey, and by macro averaging, we can see that the precision, recall, and F1 of the human experts, and comparing them to the respective scores obtained for the system, we observe that the latter is the best overall, shown in bold. We note that this is not the typical text classification setting employed in NLP. In fact, experimenting with better approaches such as neural approaches, recurrent neural networks or so, we got better results. However, what this experiment verifies is that language modeling is a promising means for computational authorship analysis studies with regards to Homeric languages, which was the wanted in this case. So, going into more details of the methodology, we developed 24 language models per poem, using excerpts from all books but one of the same poem, Iliad and Odyssey, and then computing the perplexity on that remaining one. So performing this cyclically for all the books of the respective poem gives 24 perplexity scores per poem. These two diagrams show the perplexity scores for Iliad and Odyssey respectively, along with the respective confidence intervals. You can see lower here, the lowest confidence interval, meaning the 2.5% for this book, and the highest one. And with red dot, you can see the average. So by looking at the lowest confidence intervals of Iliad on the left, we see that it is the second and eighth book that are scored with the least perplexity. This means that there are excerpts within these books that are strongly associated linguistically with the remaining 23 books. By looking at the average perplexity, we can assess the overall linguistic proximity of a book with the rest of the books. And we can see that the lowest average perplexity was achieved for the 17th book. But we can also focus on the highest confidence interval and the highest average perplexity. By looking at the former, at the highest confidence interval, we see that the 14th book has the highest perplexity. This means that it comprises excerpts that are weakly associated with the remaining books. And the highest average perplexity was achieved for the 9th Iliad book, followed by the 3rd. For Odyssey, similarly, it was the 9th book that was most shown in red, and the 16th in green that was least strongly linguistically associated with the remaining books. What is surprising in this diagram, however, is that the 24th book comprises excerpts that are both most weakly and most strongly associated with the rest. This analysis so far has already provided an example of how to use language modeling to view Homeric language by distance. And the hope is that this will be studied closer by interested scholars to bridge further the gap between distant and close reading. So in other words, this is the first step. We think that this brings some findings, but more exist and they should be studied. For example, with more language models, with better preprocessing, with hypotheses set from the beginning, for example, for specific verses. However, we did one more thing on this study. We trained one language model per book, per poem. And for each poem then, we used its book language model, its book-wise language model to compute the score of all the poem's books. Hence, we were able to measure the correlation between any two such score lists using Pearson's law. So these two diagrams depict these two correlation heat maps, one per poem. In other words, a red square indicates a positive correlation between the two respective books, while a blue square indicates a negative one. In our case, a red square means intuitively that there is a positive trend between the scores resulted by the models trained on those two books, and are shown in the figure with the red line up on the left. Similarly, a blue square means that there is a negative trend. Books that receive a relatively high perplexity by one model will receive a low perplexity by the other. This is a confusing, perhaps, concept, but we can focus on the most visible to the eye observations. So we observed that in the left figure, the 5th book of Iliad has a negative correlation with the 9th book. And we also observe a positive correlation between the 1st book and the 19th book, and between the 15th and the 24th. More interesting, however, are the findings of this correlation study for Odyssey. We see that the 9th and the 10th books are negatively correlated with most other books, except from each other. And book 12 seems to follow suit in being consistently negatively related to the rest of the books. And we also observe a clearly positive correlation with 9 and 10. There are also strong positive correlations among book 2 and 24, and also 2 and 19. But this is, as said a few slides before, the first step. Could we get a better signal if we used a different preprocessing? Here we took just a sample from books. What if we used the whole books to train the language model? And what if we use a different preprocessing? If we kept the verse information? But before suggesting future work, we did a final experiment. We did a study of the so-called Homeric hymns, and we used a 24 Iliad and 24 Odyssey language models, respectively, to compute 48 perplexity scores per hymn. Each of these models is trained on all books of the respective poem but one, and 1,000 excerpts were randomly sampled per hymn, 600 characters each, and the average score was computed per model per hymn. So these figures present these scores. Twerms is the least likely hymn of the four to have been written by the author or authors of Iliad, shown on the left, and Odyssey on the right. On the other hand, To Aphrodite is the hymn that is most likely written by the authors of Iliad. To Aphrodite, shown in red, is linguistically close to both Homeric poems. To Hermes is most often above that area, and what we could conclude is that the greatest linguistic proximity to the Iliad and Odyssey out of the four hymns is presented by the hymn To Aphrodite, person Aphrodite, an hymn that is often considered by scholars like Morris and Powell the most Homeric of all, because it is close to the Homeric poems in terms of poetic language, style, and theme. So for some concluding remarks, Homeric language models can classify Iliad and Odyssey excerpts comparably to the average human expert, as we started with. Our models also suggest that To Aphrodite is the most Homeric hymn of all, and some groups of books are linguistically closer than others, while other groups are from the rest of the same, compared to the rest of the same poem. So this concludes this study. And before I thank you for attending and for your time and going into questions, I would just like to draw a weakness perhaps that some of you may have. We have not really focused in depth to analyze the findings that this distant view gave. So we didn't go into close reading the specific verses or the specific books or internal parts of these books to bring more evidence. And this is because we wanted to focus on the distant part. Plus that we think that now this next step is more visible and more easy to do. So thank you for your time. Thank you for attending and attending. And I will be here for any questions, any discussion. I'll be very happy to engage.
Thank you very much indeed, Gianni. Can we switch back to the tiles mode so that we can see the audience online?
Yes.
So everyone is invited to turn on the camera if you don't mind, so that Giovanni and we can actually see who's there. If you don't like, you don't have to. So thank you very much. This was a real tour de force, and please, nobody should feel intimidated by all these numbers and models, and you can ask a very basic question. So this is an interdisciplinary seminar, and I know we have art historians and literary scholars and not necessarily all computational linguists, so we can ask very basic and genuine questions, and I think these are the most useful questions. Of course, we have also our specialists here in the sala and in the audience online. So now it's time for discussion questions. You are invited to leave a note in the chat, or also type your key your questions in the chat, or raise your hand, or here in the aula you can shout. I think we have a microphone over here, so that should work all very well. I'm opening the chat for me so I can follow remarks in the chat. Also, if you want to share other information challenging the results of Giovanni, so that's also welcome.
I could start sharing, perhaps doubting these studies or searching for criticism, because these are the first steps. We were also, when doing this research, we weren't sure how the community will receive it, but the feedback we got, at least from the workshop, was enthusiastic. So I should note that extended versions are coming for both, and we are trying to make this as more concrete and robust as possible. So there are two goals. Again, apologies for the numbers. I feel insecure without presenting any. But the point here is how could we bridge the gap between distance and close reading? So my idea is that we could use distant viewing or distant reading to get interesting patterns or specific images in the first case and specific verses in the second case. And then the idea could be invite scholars to give their perspective regarding the extracted verses and images. So that's one possible way. I can't think of another, but please do share any ideas. The other is how one could guide pre-processing of texts and in order to improve the results when the results are really they're related. A comparison is between the same poems. So just sharing some thoughts. Please feel free to initiate any discussion away from numbers and away of computational stuff. These are things that are really secondary on these studies.
So just maybe a warm-up question. So how far do your results, maybe I missed this, correspond with the general opinion or knowledge state of the art by traditional scholars as regards the Homeric question? You said yourself this is one of the most long-term questions on the Homeric work. Did you have some feedback, or did traditional scholars feel approved? So, as regards their evaluation of the textual situation, or is this still missing? And have you really been the first team to apply natural language processing on the Homeric work? So
regarding the second question, which is easy to respond, no, we are not the first to apply NLP. But regarding authorship and studying the authorship, we are kind of the first. There was another study a year ago that the reviewers also of the workshop brought to our attention, that they studied the intraline pauses of the Homeric poems, but this was not the focus of the study. This was a complementary experiment they did. So what we hope for is that using language modeling, which is an NLP, which is part of a core part of NLP, if I may say. So, for example, to give more details, there was a big bang in natural language processing the recent years with a model. Some of you might have heard it, BERT. So it's in fact a language model. So it learns a language by predicting words that are hidden, and by doing so, amazing tasks have been solved, nearly being solved by transferring the model, the language model, and then calibrating it to, for example, recognize the topic or different downstream, as they call them, tasks. So the question is, can we use language modeling to analyze authorship in texts like Homeric texts, where it's not clear who wrote it? We don't have the name, we don't have other texts of the author who wrote this. And what are ways to analyze it? So we hope that it will bring more light and the results will be used so much computationally as for close reading from a qualitative perspective. So that's about NLP applied on Homeric text. It's not popular, of course. I mean, I could see, I'm aware of 2 or 3 studies, but no more. And regarding the former question, the state of the art, this is an analysis. So there isn't a clear state of the art, but the question still remains. I mean, that we can't compare, we can't ground to some baseline doesn't mean that we don't have to. So for when we extended this work, we took the same methodology and we applied it on other texts, not Homeric texts, to see whether it works. So this was our kind of grounding. But yeah, of course, we welcome more ideas on that perspective.
There's a question from Vicky, so if you like, you can ask it also yourself, Vicky.
Good evening from snowy Athens as well. I have a question for Dr. Pavlopoulos. It's good to see you again. Could you please elaborate a little bit on the way the annotators were chosen? Because, you know, I saw there were some undergrads and you put some undergrads versus a machine. I'm not sure it's quite, fair. So a little bit on the methodology about the...
So that's true that not a lot of information was shared here. There are in the paper. There were not undergrads. In fact, there were undergrads and experts, like PhD students. We consider PhD students to be experts. So we try to use as more backgrounds as possible because we wanted to compare. This was an initiative taken by Maria Kostadinidou, Professor Kostadinidou, so I think, okay, and we try to make it as broad as possible, the set of annotators. So given that there were experts among them, and the system performed quite high, I mean, some were outperformed, I can give no attention to the fact that undergraduate students were outperformed. So I didn't focus at all at the left side of the tail that were the ones that did not perform well. Of course, you are right in that perspective. And yeah.
It's like, you know, in my eyes, it was like a competition between amateur cooks and professional cooks on MasterChef. The professional is going to win no matter what. That's why I had this concern. So it was a little bit unfair if you ask me. Okay, a PhD student specializing in Homer, I could see this. I mean, this is just my concern.
There was also, I think, Professor Kostadinidou, I think, has already provided more context, and thank you. She knows it better than I, but I would focus on the right side of the tail. So the fact that this system, this naive system, is quite close on the right, on the best of the experts, is amazing, because we didn't use a system trained to classify between Iliad and Odyssey. We wanted to verify whether the models that we will use to analyze Homeric text are capable of doing what we think they are doing. So this was an artificial task that we expected the system not to beat anyone. So it's like testing its power, its predictive power, on a task that we did not use. So we did not use at all classifying between Iliad and Odyssey.
The truth is that the results were quite spectacular, that's for sure. I mean,
yeah. I think there's also... Thank you for attending.
Thank you very much for your answer.
And there's also a question, I think, by...
question from Kivilchim. Yeah, nice to see you, Kivilchim.
Yes,
please.
Hi. This is very exciting. I'm really glad to see applications of NLP for images and also for ancient and possibly medieval texts in the future. I just want to ask, how do you see... I mean, if I understand correctly, you used modern editions for your analysis, right? So how does the manuscript culture play into NLP work when we are looking at ancient and medieval texts? I mean, in terms of possibilities, not only in terms of limitations, but in terms of possibilities. I mean, the lack of authorial copies, for example, or the variation in manuscripts. Could this lead, into different kinds of things, such as, for example, there are a lot of anonymous chronicles and hypotheses about, several people continuing the same chronicle. So like you were comparing different books of the same, from the same work, from Iliad or Odyssey, and saying, some of them are closer to each other and some of them are closer to the other books and things like that. So could we use these kind of strategies, you think, for longer works that we suspect were written by different people over a period of time and things like that? Just an excellent can you expand a little bit on?
Yeah, certainly.
Especially,
and I'll be happy to bring more context. So there are some fields that I have not discussed, but you give me the pass to discuss now, and thank you for this. So I should start from yes. This is what we want. Yeah, definitely. We want to use this like a tool, like a method that is easy to use. It's not like some technical hard thing to accomplish. So it can be done with a few lines of code. And you can do it to provide not exactly evaluation like this beats that, as Vicky suggested earlier. And that was another great opportunity to explain that we did this like to see whether it would perform well. So it's validated, a validated means to use it. But now going into the real question, if we use this, that we feel confident, this language modeling as a technique to use it, what can we answer? And this is a great example. Can we use it to search for different chronologies or additions from different chronologies? That's one thing. Different authors, different times, and the limits are not clear, at least to myself. I mean, we cannot really, we can see that it works, but what can it answer? What can it answer, and how do we trust its answers? So this is why we really hope that new channels will emerge between distant and close reading. We want distant reading to bring something closer to our eyes, but we really need close reading to verify whether this is something that can be verified. If we give, for example, all the literature to someone who would want to go in depth, then time is not unlimited. Some short listings should be done. And we hope that this will perform exactly this short listing. But this is an opportunity to give some more context. So what a student did in her thesis a few months back is that she applied character recognition, handwritten character recognition from, I think, medieval texts, if I recall correctly. But it was from the 10th to the 16th, or I should go into details. Let's say it was from 7 centuries going back. And she annotated the data set and tried to do OCR with Tesseract or other software. And she found out that it doesn't perform the same in different centuries. So in one century it works, in the other it completely fails. So this brings more questions that we need to study more how we trust, how much do we trust out of the box tool, as going back to my the first part of this presentation. We need to stress test NLP and data science tools. And while we stress test these tools, we want to bring closer people who could close read the results of this, because this will make a circle and provide better results. So that's my view on that.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. We have a long statement in the chat from Javier. If you want to summarize it yourself, then you're welcome. So please,
sure.
Where are you? I can't see you.
I could try reading it. It's really long, but if I heard it, I'm not sure I could answer it. So I'll try to read it and elaborate on that. But before that, I would like to thank Professor Konstantinidou, who made me remember another detail coming in response to Vicky, who, again, thank you for asking this. It's something I also ask. So there was another detail I forgot. We wanted to avoid Homerists who know exactly the whole text, so they would respond 100% certain. So this is why we also included not experts in this pool of annotators. That's an important detail, of course. So going into to Javier's question, the present work focuses on samples from Iliad and Odyssey, and that is a formal understanding of Homeric text with an implementation of paraphrase generator, requiring a more syntactic rhetorical analysis in order to detect the traits. I think this could be another work, perhaps that might be of interest to us, maybe. Yeah. Not sure if I understand the question. If you are, Javier.
Never mind. So we keep the chat. So this is more like an academic footnote, maybe. So and we keep the footnotes, of course.
Sure.
And that is probably useful for your further work here.
Yeah. Thank you, Javier.
Yeah. More questions also from the audience. So I'm neglecting our audience here in the sala. So I see several colleagues present and online. So your next, so we had a lunch already together in Venice, and you were bursting of ideas and materials to apply various strategies and methods. So what are your concrete next materials or questions you want to address?
So, well, one interesting, one question that at least intrigues me is what happens when we inject sentiment into the question. So we have Homeric text, and we have still today being played in theaters and being studied. Judging from myself, I'm not I'm not a linguist or a philologist. I have the two books in my library, and I keep on reading them every 2 years or so. So I really like this both poems, especially Iliad, and I keep on reading it. But I get different sentiments, get different emotions every time I read it. So the question is, can we use also sentiment as a signal to focus on specific parts and study how people perceive it now and perhaps over time? So that's something I'm very interested to study. There is a work already under review. Hopefully data will come out that will help out people to focus on this question. Then there is an extended version of this work, the authorship attribution regarding Iliad and Odyssey, that's revisiting all the concepts that were done in this preliminary edition of the workshop, presented at the workshop. And last but not least, there is a study of the ukiyo-e prints. So could that be expanded into many more artifacts? Could it be for epigraphs, for papyri? Could we use that to extract information and use the extracted information to zoom in a map and zoom out and move over time and space and start answering questions, or perhaps give motivation to cultural institutions for exhibitions, or even collecting information from visitors? So these are at least some of the questions that are stacked at the top priority of my mind.
I see also Federico Tannozzi, and that reminds me that you are doing a very nice encoding on the Homeric text, if I'm not mistaken. And you just mentioned, Giovanni, in a half a phrase, that the first thing you do, you remove the TI. So that's the typical case for these wonderful documents that we enrich with so much information, structural information, semantic information. All our knowledge is encoded in these TI encoded files. And is there no way to bring these opponent or not, so that these do not communicate, so that machine learning is not machine learning is surely able to deal with everything, but there are I don't see any projects that try to benefit from all this information that is already there. So entities are already recognized, and semantics are identified and made explicit and maybe linked to taxonomy, ontology, whatever. So this is always not depressing, but it's in a way very disappointing, because there's so much work already available as data in the markup. So, Federico, if you want to briefly say what you are encoding in these texts, and I'm sure there has to be a use case scenario for Giovanni.
Yeah, thank you, because I actually met Ioannis in Venice, so thank you very much, Ioannis, for your presentation. It was really, really interesting. When we met, we talked about the marking up the sentiments in the Iliad. So now it's nice to see another take on natural language processing. Actually, my work goes on another direction. So I'm working on the structure of epic poetry. So considering how the type scenes and motifs that Homer relied upon when he composed his poems are actually structuring the scenes, like, for instance, the battle scenes in the epics. And that's my take. So that's what I'm doing in my PhD research. it's quite a different approach. But one thing that I would like to know when it comes to trying to find an answer to the Homeric question, which is of course very, very difficult. You mentioned that you try to work with trigrams, so a group of 3 characters, and trying to define a pattern. I'm definitely not proficient in NLP, so perhaps my question is not that relevant, but I would like to know if there are other ways of trying to define like Homeric style. For instance, I was thinking about formularity. So if you don't take into account like groups of 3 characters, but like words and the meaning of the words, it could be useful and lead to different results, perhaps. And if you don't take like words, word for word, you can also try to work with quantities. So you know that in an hexameter you have 24 more, a certain number of quantity of syllables, and you can work with that because group of letters are not that relevant, but quantities of syllables are much more important. So I don't know if you have taken into account this aspect in your research. And thank you again.
So again, thank you, Franz and Federico, for giving me the opportunity to elaborate more. I'm usually afraid to go into many details for work that is still ongoing, but now I feel much more comfortable to talk more about it. We could not doing sentiment analysis without rich semantic information. So this is what we have discussed with Federico, and we are in fact elaborating on that. So can people, for example, not experts, provide this semantic information accurately? It's one question. Perhaps what happens to people who give without this semantic information signal? For example, in a theater where they simply press a button, could we use their signal? So this needs a parallel study with different kind of information, but I definitely agree that without semantic information, we cannot answer. It's like, it's at least in my eyes, it's closer to the closer reading perspective. However, there is a problem. If we want to train machine learning algorithms, we want annotations at scale. So we want fast, many annotations so that they can train a machine learning model, which we can then use to give it to better annotators who can then do more accurate annotation, like a consultant. This is at least a perspective, but then again, there is the other perspective that we should focus on rich quality annotation. I have all these questions in my mind, and I'm really looking forward, Federico, to work more and start answering this. So this is with respect to how about semantic information, and I should also give another view of how I feel. So I feel not disappointed exactly as well as someone could say, feeling disappointing for being in the first step is one take. Feeling excited for being at the first step that many great things could apply is another happy way to see it. So I feel on the second, because what we did is we really took out all of the parameters that we could have done. So we took the simplest of pre-processing. We took the simplest of language modeling. I mean, we took the statistical language modeling, which is outdated by neural language models, and we took a simplest notion of statistical significance. Why? Because we could not make all these assumptions. There were too many assumptions to take. So now that we still have some grounds that it works, it gives some findings, we think we can focus on better pre-processing. And my mind at least goes to verses and information that we already have. I mean, we have discussed, and it's reasonable also, sense poses could be something that could work. Verses, where the verse ends, and word length, and more features. But yeah, we are definitely at the step above zero. So we just did the simplest of the approaches that we could do to validate more takes on that.
The longer we discuss, the more questions pop up. Javier finally made it seems. So if you want to pose your question briefly, and then we have a last question from the audience from Federico Boschetti, and I will bring the microphone. So Javier, I know you are gone again, I'm afraid. Otherwise, Federico, if you want to pose your question.
Thank you. So it isn't really a question, it is an observation, okay, about the fact that Homer is a very good playground, okay, because corpora, Homeric corpora, okay, so the corpus of the Homeric poems is fully annotated in many ways. So, for example, the Perseus project has also the syntactic annotation of this corpora, okay, and also we have at disposition the metrical analysis of each verse. So, in this case, it is very interesting to combine the different evidences that can be found in the poems. For example, if you make the formulaic analysis, you see that the formulae are quite homogeneously distributed in the different books, okay, with differences that must be evaluated, okay, but I guess that it is very interesting to combine the different layers of quantitative analysis, okay, and in order to see if they are consistent or if there are some contradictions, okay, about the data. One of the most important things is that we have this great quantity of analysis of data, and they are open data that are at disposition, and so to work on Homer is wonderful.
Thank you, Federico. I totally agree, and I'm excited for this project and looking forward to what we could do. Now, in fact, following up on your thoughts, I wonder whether we could make a circle, distant, then close, then distant, then close. I wonder whether there are benefits in making a loop, but yeah, just thoughts coming up.
That's exactly what I always have in mind, so to create loops, so that should be the way, I think. So thank you very much, everyone attending here. We lost again Javier. I'm very sorry that this didn't work out. There you are back, so that would be your chance. Otherwise, we are reaching the end of our seminar. There's also a comment and a reference from Rita Maria Bucciarelli, which is also safe in the chat. So thank you everyone here in the audience and at home or wherever you are online. We will have the next seminar in 2 weeks by Tiago Gil, who is also present here in the Sala, and I will read you the title. It's about GIS and historical digital atlases. So Tiago is also a visiting scholar for half a year here in Venice, and he made it to come here from Brasilia, which was also very complicated. Yeah, please check up our website for registration if you not have registered yet, and disseminate the news. Thank you very much once again, Giovanni.
Thank you.
Applaus from Sala. And we look forward to have you back in Venice.
Same here. Looking forward.
We'll make it. Okay.